Welcome to Haunted by Proxy. I'm Landon.
And I'm Joey.
This story is called The Donner Cut. I love Superman. He has been my favorite character for as long as I can remember. I used to make my mom and dad lay down on their back and use their legs to lift me so I could feel like I was flying when I was a kid. If I'm being honest, I even tried doing this recently with my girlfriend. Her name is Maxine. I made this up to keep her anonymous, but I call her Lois as a nickname. She can't lift me as well as my dad could because she's only 5'5" and 90 pounds. She's petite, very pretty, and even prettier when she wears a pantsuit like Lois Lane. She sometimes cosplays as Harley Quinn or Poison Ivy, but she always changes into her Lois Lane outfit if I pout enough, which I do, every single time. I met her after her high school graduation ceremony. She was my neighbor growing up, but I never saw her, as she was homeschooled and largely kept indoors. On her graduation day, she was outside in a cap and gown, and I saw her from my room, and I immediately ran outside and said she looked like she could be the Lois Lane to my Superman. She said she had never heard such a thing in her whole life, and something other than the quiet suburb we grew up in, and seeing as we'd been together almost 6 months at this point, we thought we could try to move in together. So we packed up. She had never seen TV or movies, so I showed her a whole new world of exciting possibilities. But it started to get a little harder as time moved on. I'm not sure why, but she started wanting to dress up as different characters from the movies and shows we were watching, and kept going to a fabric store in the downtown area where we lived. I started to untie the string when the guy said, "Hey, just take that home. She wanted you to have it. She'd been coming in, paying it off for weeks now. It's yours." The day that I hand him his ass on a platter, Clark Kent Superman style. That would have to wait. I had a present to open. Like someone's illegal dupe of it, like they ran a copy onto a blank tape, probably recorded over their sister's ballet recital, or their late grandfather Al's funeral if I had to guess at something, just as I imagined. But something was off. First off, there was no music. Not the music from the 2006 Donner Cut. I realized what this was. The original Donner Cut. Somehow, someway, I was watching Richard Donner's cut of the film, a rough draft. For the record, I want to say that Margot Kidder is my number 3 on-screen Lois Lane. My Lois actually looks most like her of all the real Lois Lanes, except knowing that the gun is shooting blanks. She does, he doesn't flinch, and she outs him once and for all as the big blue Boy Scout. Here, I haven't even seen Lois. Clark opens his robe. His body is scarred with what look like flesh-colored tattoos. They're images, but I can't quite make them out. It isn't the layered voice anymore either. It is one distinct, familiar voice. In fact, I know that sob. I've heard it plenty. Someone else's. This, though, this defeated, terrified sob, it is hers alone. The hair make me never look at Superman the same way again, never gaze upon Lois Lane the same way, never love the same way ever again. Clark, as if I didn't just see everything I saw. I hold the remote at the TV and rewind, but none of the footage that I just sat through is there. I've got to get to the bookstore. They're ruining my life. They took everything from me. I got to the building where the bookstore is and tried opening the door. I didn't do what they said I did, but eventually my lawyer said I should just plead guilty so my parents could move on with their lives. Meredith investigated, and she didn't know anything about my Lois, Maxine, or anyone at all. She said I looked familiar but couldn't place why, the women they found in the old bookstore basement. I knew it was incriminating to even ask such a thing, but I just had to see if Maxine, my Lois. They took all of my things, of course. The second of my 2 conditions, though, was that whoever, the cops, the feds, a priest for all I know,